Howdy, everyone. Welcome to Narrative Dissonance here on Unsafe Space. I'm your host, Carter Laren. Today is, May 23rd, Monday, May 23rd. If you're not watching us on unsafespace.com on the live stream, you should, because we don't cancel ourselves there. But you could be watching on YouTube, Odyssey, Rumble. If you are, don't forget to do all the things that make you a good person, like, share, subscribe, all that stuff. You can follow us on Twitter at _unsafespace until Elon gives us our old account back, and then you can drop the underscore. But for now, that's what we are. This is a show we do every Monday at 2 p.m. Pacific. It's a new time. We've only been doing it at the new time for a couple weeks. So if you're listening to a recording, if you want to check us out live, we're now 2 p.m. Pacific. And this show is about questioning the mainstream narrative and imagining a world in which journalism was journalism instead of propaganda for the state. So if you want to support us in that or any other show that we do here, you can go to unsafespace.com. One housekeeping message. Our next book club is House of Leaves by Mark Danielowski. It's hosted by Alex Maselli, who's the host of our 451 Degrees show. That'll be on June 12th. So if you want to do that, read up. Apparently, it's one of these fiction books that's actually work. I don't know how I feel about that, but you're supposed to figure stuff out and take notes or something. Yeah, fun. Okay, so this week's edition of Narrative Dissonance is, we can call it the Libertarian Podcast Edition, because we have two awesome Libertarian podcasters with us. First, let's welcome Clint Russell. Clint was a private mortgage broker who managed hundreds of millions in investor funds and then retired in his 30s, as you do, to rail against the lockdowns. He started Liberty Lockdown in May 2020 and has since been on Timcast IRL with Tim Pool, Tinfoil Hat with Sam Tripoli, and Part of the Problem with Dave Smith. You can follow him on Twitter at Liberty Lock Pod, or you can go to his link tree, which is Liberty Lockdown. We'll put links to all that stuff in the show notes. Clint, welcome.
Thank you for having me, Carter. It's a pleasure.
Yep. There we go. Thanks for being here. We're also joined by David Brady. David is an aspiring journalist and an Austro-libertarian. I think that means he likes Austrian economics. He has had pieces published at the Foundation for Economic Education, Being Libertarian, and the Libertarian Institute. He's currently the social media manager for the Libertarian Party of Minnesota and an at-large representative for the party. He hosts the Road to Providence podcast that can be found on YouTube and Odyssey. You can follow him on Twitter at Real David B. Jr. or Jr. And you can find his podcast and writings through his link tree, which is Real David B. Jr., which we'll put that link in. David, welcome.
Hey, man. Great to be here.
I'm just thrilled to get to do a podcast with my son for the first time ever. To have us both guesting on a show at the same time. It's kind of like when Ken Griffey Jr. and Sr. were both playing at the same time. This is incredible.
Yeah. Well, he still has his hair. What, are you just the baby daddy though? What's the last name difference?
No, he's using a stage name because he's embarrassed of me.
Yeah.
It's David Russell, actually.
So. Yeah. True. I didn't want to tell anyone, but I guess we're breaking the news right here, man. I guess that's the truth.
Hey, if anyone's gonna dox you, it should be your dad.
Yeah.
He's too young to know, but that's like a Maury Povich moment.
Yes,
that we just had there. It's right.
I feel like such a zoomer now. God.
I know. How does that feel? Is your generation going to fix all this shit?
Please.
We fucked it up.
If I get my way, yes, we'll fix it.
Excellent.
Otherwise, I don't know. From what I'm seeing, like right now, for the current trajectory, it's not looking so hot.
Excellent. Well, we will let seniority and lack of hair follicles that are active go first. Clint, what's the most important story about which mainstream media has been misleading us in this past week? What do you think?
Well, to me, it's clearly the economic problems that we're having and the blame that they're placing elsewhere. You had over $7 trillion based off of what I've read. It's over 10 trillion during the lockdown that was either printed or borrowed, and now we are suffering the consequences of that economically. And instead of owning up to that, the government, true believers in MMT, some of them, and others that are just, to the core liars and propagandists, they don't want to discuss that, because then they would have to acknowledge that, yes, we locked down needlessly, and yes, you suffered economically needlessly and psychologically needlessly, and we still had a bunch of people die. So there was no reason for it, and they're trying to pivot to lay that at the doorstep of Vladimir Putin, which, if anyone was paying any attention whatsoever, the cost of goods were skyrocketing far prior to him ever invading Ukraine. So I think that that's probably been the biggest mislead over the past week and over the past probably 3 months.
Yeah. I mean, gas prices predated I remember gas price arguments in September or October. People were complaining.
Absolutely. Yep.
I mean, it was a long time ago. So, well, I mean, Bezos is doing fine after the lockdowns, though. So I don't know what the big issue is.
Well, yeah, I mean, if that's your only concern and you don't care about feeding your kids, then it's no big deal. Yeah, I mean, that's why I was such a just a psychopath about fighting against the lockdowns, is because that's what it amounted to, is that the richest got richer and the poor got poorer. And even in the interim, because of the bailouts, the stimulus checks and the added unemployment insurance and things of that nature, it allowed people to feel as if they were doing okay. But I knew that what it amounted to was probably the greatest transfer of wealth in our lifetime, from the many to the few. And as someone who is a true believer in capitalism, I identified immediately that's not capitalism. This is crony capitalism. And it's very important that the libertarians delineate between the two, because otherwise you will have a populist uprising that demands that we alleviate the income inequality at the cost of capitalism, when in fact we are already flying toward Marxism or fascism or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. I mean, I look, I'm not, David, this is not me picking on you. Or were you around when when Occupy Wall Street was a thing, or were you?
I mean, I was alive. I was alive. I wasn't paying attention necessarily. I mean, I've watched that Peter Schiff video, where he walks around with the sign saying, "I am the 1%, let's talk," where he walks around Occupy Wall Street trying to tell them about how the Fed is really the cause of all their problems. And it's not, well, and the government, the Fed and the government caused all the problems rather than, actually the 1% most of the time.
Yeah. The reason I'm asking is because it's, and I've said this before on the show, but there's something I think that resonated, that was accurate about the emotional response of Occupy Wall Street. They felt like something was wrong, and they were right, but they blamed capitalism, which is a common trope. I mean, it was done in the 1929 crash and subsequent depression was blamed on capitalism. The 2008 stuff was blamed on capitalism. None of it was actual capitalism. But I mean, where we are now, what if you think we've printed 10 trillion? What are we in, 30 trillion in debt or something now? What's our debt number? I don't even know.
Yeah, it's somewhere around 30. Now. Yeah, it's somewhere around 30 trillion floating around there.
That's what I figured. So, and I've seen all these articles about, I've seen two different tacks. One is it's Marussia. That's what you were talking about, Clint. The other one is inflation is fine. That's a good thing. Let's have a conversation about why it's great that you're paying $7 a gallon for gas in California.
Because they want you to eat bugs.
Well, I mean, that is actually, as humorous as it sounds, that's kind of true. The Great Reset, the Green New Deal, this is a very man-made crisis that is intentional and is attempting to get us off of fossil fuel use by, again, some people that are true believers and some people that are rotten to the core and just lying through their teeth. But when Biden came in, he canceled a bunch of lease contracts for drilling on federal lands. In fact, all of them, all new lease contracts on federal lands, and then he goes, "My hands are clean." Sure, you're paying double what you were when I came into office, but it has nothing to do with me. This is all Vladimir Putin. It's just a lie, but it's intentional. That's the thing that ought to upset the American people most, is that they knew that getting off of fossil fuels and aggressively transitioning to quote unquote renewable energy, which isn't truly renewable, oftentimes. Right. We were gonna pay a huge economic price, and in a democracy, if you believe in that thing, which I don't, you should be putting it to the people to decide if that's actually what they want. And if you want them to decide, you ought to be giving them the actual information as to what that amounts to when it comes to suffering. But instead, they just paint it as this is the good and anything else is the bad, and you must go along with the good. Aren't you good? Or are you a racist? And that's the argumentation.
Yeah, I mean, you're making me think of another kind of news story, but I'll throw it out there anyway, which is this week is Davos, and they're meeting in person, which is a big deal. I guess lizards can mate better if they're in person. And they're if you look at Klaus Schwab and you look at the history of WEF, you see an intentional attempt to use or manufacture crises in order to get to their particular agenda. They tried it with global warming and climate change earlier on, and it wasn't working. And so COVID was kind of a godsend because they found something that resonated with people enough. They could gin up enough fear that people were willing to give up their freedoms because COVID. And they've, I haven't watched a lot of it. I've watched a little bit of the Davos coverage, but the theme this year is, hold on, I get it right out of his mouth. The theme is history at a turning point. And one of the things that they're concerned about is that the proletariat, like us, well, maybe Clint is in the 0.01%, I don't know, but the proletariat, we all, they're worried that we don't trust them anymore. And they're right. Yeah, and they're right. So I guess, is the problem I know the problem's in Washington, but how do you deal with the fact that this is not, they're supported, the people that are causing these problems are supported by large multinational organizations. And I mean, it's not like you voted for Mr. Jones and you should have voted for Mr. Smith, and Mr. Jones implemented these policies all on his own, and like he's destroying the nation. And if you just replace it with Mr. Smith, you'll get a different result in Washington. No matter whom you vote for, you still have an entire globalist elite class that actually has quite a bit of control and influence over what the United States does, and is getting more.
Yeah, I describe it as a technocratic oligarchy. I mean, we have, that's really what they believe in, is this technocracy, which is the intelligentsia that rules over us fools, and that if you lived through the past 2 years, you now know that they are more than willing to talk about that openly. You trust the science, you trust the experts, you trust Fauci and Birx, and you don't trust anybody else. You have this limited allowable opinion, and anything outside of it makes you a conspiracy theorist and someone who wants to kill grandmothers. So that's their mechanism for control, and I think it's sincere. They honestly believe that. They don't believe this. This is what's so frustrating when they argue in favor of defending democracy across the globe. These people do not believe in democracy because they don't believe in the intelligence of the voters. If you think that the voting class is stupid, which they do, then why do you want us voting? You don't. Which is why you propagandize us aggressively and you manipulate elections. Not in America, obviously. I would never say such a thing. But elsewhere,
of course,
across the globe, because they don't want democracy. They don't want the people to have a say in what's going on. And this is now the product of it, that you have multinational corporations and supranational organizations like the World Economic Forum that get to dictate policy, and then it gets implemented through the World Economic Forum, but then ESG ratings, BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street, across the board. They are all pushing this agenda simultaneously, and no one has voted on it. And this is a global push. So it is a very new phenomenon. And in fact, it was my second category answer. So I will refrain from
run right in there. Okay.
I will refrain from answering further.
All right. Well, we can talk about that in a moment. David, what do you think we've been misled about this past week?
The fact that we need to send Ukraine $40 billion. Sending $40 billion to Ukraine is nothing but a money laundering scheme to the military-industrial war complex that only wants to fight this war down to the last Ukrainian and try to prolong it just so they can keep funneling money to their cronies. They have no care for these Ukrainians at all. If they cared for these Ukrainians, Blinken would be in Moscow right now talking to Putin or Sergei Lavrov. They would have been talking to them by now. If they actually showed any care, they would have done that. Instead, they decided, we're going to go and try to muddy this, make this swamp even worse for the Russians, at the cost of dragging out this war, causing more and more human suffering. The fact that we are sending 40 billion when, you know, people like Marjorie Taylor Greene saying, when we don't even have baby formula on shelves, it's outrageous. They feel that they can just funnel money to their cronies in like Raytheon and Boeing, all at the cost of Ukrainian lives and American taxpayers getting screwed over in the process. We don't need to be sending that money there at all.
Well, and actually it's empowered. I think it's, you know, long term, I think you're going to see more blood as a result, obviously, but it's empowered Zelensky. I was just seeing this morning that he's now said that it was either Zelensky or someone in his you know, higher ups was saying that they're not looking for a ceasefire. They don't want to negotiate a ceasefire anymore. It's like, well, that's because you're armed. Like if you didn't feel like you had Big Brother, and I don't mean that in the Orwellian way, I mean that in a Big Brother, Big Sister way. If you didn't feel like you had Big Brother on the block to back you up all the time, maybe you would be negotiating a peace treaty instead of being willing to kill every last Ukrainian.
I mean, year to date, the U.S. government has spent more money on Ukraine's military than Russia has on their own. So, yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, there's no chance that this war would be as protracted as it's been if it weren't for American support. Now, if you strongly believe that Ukraine is innocent in all of this, then maybe you can make an argument that that's a good thing. I personally do not find it to be a good thing that we are using these people in a proxy war to control or hem in Vladimir Putin. And really, it's, in my opinion, it's about defending the petrodollar reserve system, where the US dollar is, that's basically the only reason that we are still the top dog on the block, and we have to defend that. And Putin has aggressively, sold his resources in the ruble, and that is a huge threat to the U.S. hegemonic empire. So it's going to get ugly, man. And I think that there's a very high probability that Zelensky or whoever would have replaced him, because I don't think that this would have been very popular if America hadn't come to his defense. I think that he would have been at the negotiating table a long time ago if it weren't for our involvement. And now we're going to see how it plays out. But what it amounts to is a proxy war between two nuclear powers. And once again, the American people are not being educated on the danger that they're being put in with all of this.
Yeah, it's been a proxy war since like 2014, though. Since we overthrew the Ukrainian government in one of those color-coded revolutions, we funded neo-Nazi groups to attack, Russian-speaking Ukrainians, to commit their little war on terrorism in the east of Ukraine. The two, Luhansk and Luhansk, those provinces that are trying to secede and become their own government. If we agree that we want, what's the phrase to go? Self-determination. Yeah, we agreed that we want self-determination for Ukraine, but not for these provinces who don't feel like the Ukrainian government represents them, so they want to go and form their own government. They wanted to join Russia for a while, but Russia didn't want them in because, of course, they got an elderly population that would have strained the Kremlin's treasury in the resources. So, but it's been a proxy war ever since then. They've been doing a war on terrorism, sending neo-Nazi groups like the Svoboda Party and the Azov Battalion into that region to cause problems.
It's amazing how important self-determination is when it's in your political interests, and how unimportant it is when it's not. I think, Russia's entire, I just looked it up, Russia's entire military budget annually is $65.9 billion. And that was their increase. That was in 2021, as they were like spending more to ramp up for this. So we're outspending Russia's entire military budget at this point in aid to Ukraine, if you start adding all of this up. And the thing that worries me, you talk about a proxy war. Well, I guess we could talk about a couple things. One is, Clint, you brought up the petrodollar. Hasn't Putin made allusions to gold-backed rubles?
He has, yes. He's been talking about ensuring an exchange rate which sets a floor under the ruble, and essentially is likely why we are seeing such severe inflation here, is because the dollar is now no longer viewed by many central banks as a secure asset. So they've stopped buying our treasuries, which when they stop buying our treasuries, well, then we have to monetize our debt more aggressively, or we have to hike interest rates to stop the inflation, which is now why you're seeing the stock market take a shit. I mean, it's a problem all the way across the board. But to your point about how we don't honor, self-determination or democracy, we just cooed the leadership of Pakistan, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, we never care about the democratic or self-determination rules unless they are friendly to us. And this is why it's so irritating to have them talk about defending democracy, because we cooed in Ukraine, we cooed in Pakistan, we've cooed all across the
Iran.
globe.
I mean, we've cooed most of the Middle
course.
East at some point, and yeah,
my entire life plus some. So it's just a flat out lie. And if you know that, then you know that you're being lied to when they use it against you.
Yeah, and
I mean,
sorry to go ahead.
No, go ahead, David.
Oh,
Nope.
well, like the idea of just funding these extremist groups, even if they're just small fractions. Well, you know who also was a small fraction that just grew because of government funding? ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria. Jabhat al-Nusra was part of the Free Syrian Army. That is the Syrian wing of Al-Qaeda. We were propping them up to fight Assad, who wasn't even gassing his people, they later admitted. That was actually just Al-Qaeda guys trying to get more funding. But we fund these extremist groups in Syria. And you know what happens? An extremist group decides, we're not going to wait around for Al-Qaeda. We're going to go and carve out the Islamic Caliphate in the west of Iraq, in the east of Syria. And so they just carve this out. And you know what? They form probably one of the most brutal regimes in the world. So when we're funding literal neo-Nazi groups that are descended from Stepan Bandera and all of these, World War II era Nazi groups, they're the descendants of the Galatian SS who perpetrated the Holocaust. When we're funding these groups, can you imagine what these people will do after they get all the shiny new toys? Because who we funnel the money to first? The fiercest fighters who happen to be the neo-Nazis. What are they going to do with all these shiny new toys? Are we going to see the rise of like another Nazi group in the world? I wouldn't like to see that.
If you want to know who will be fighting in the future, look at who we're funding today. Comic Dave Smith, the great.
Yeah, in fact, you're reminding me. I happen to have this here because I interviewed him recently. The last sentence. I'm going to read you the last sentence or two in Scott Horton's "Enough Already" book. He says, he's talking about the war on terrorism. We just have to call the whole thing off. Ceasing intervention and relying on the thorough vetting of those who enter our country to make sure they never worked for the U.S. or our allies as paid mercenary terrorists will have to do. I mean, it's like in a nutshell, like, oh, you want to end the war on terror? Just don't let people that the CIA has funded into the country. That's probably a good way to go about it.
And stop arming and funding them. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised within a decade if we're not, in some sort of hot conflict with the Azov Battalion. It sounds crazy now, but our history proves that to be a fairly high probability event, and it's just exhausting that no matter how obvious all of this becomes in hindsight, when you try to extrapolate and apply it to the present, people think that you're crazy or call you conspiracy theorists. It's like, look, it's been my entire life. Okay, we funded Al-Qaeda to fight against Russia, and then they ended up attacking us, and we had some of the longest wars in American history because of it. So, or I think they were the longest wars in American history because of it. So we've just got to stop. We've just got to stop. And the central banking is really the reason that they're able to perpetuate this insane cycle, and that's why I rail against it so aggressively.
Well, let's unpack that just a little bit in terms of you mentioned the petrodollar, and I think a lot of people's eyes glaze over when you talk about finance and the dollar, because they don't understand the real impact that esoteric banking policies and things like that have on real people. So I mean, my understanding right now is the dollar's actually doing okay. I mean, at least compared to the euro, we're almost at parity with the euro, which is unusual. Right. And obviously the stock market's crashing. People are pulling their assets out. Bitcoin's not doing well right now for other reasons we can talk about if you want. But people are kind of still using the dollar as a shelter. And I feel like, I've been a fan of Peter Schiff. I had money with Peter Schiff years ago. I might still have some money with Peter. Like, I've been a fan of Peter Schiff for a while, but he keeps saying it's about to crash. It's about to crash. It's about to crash. And I think I've been telling everyone that everything's about to crash for 20 years. And I feel like, all right, like, when is the dollar? How does the dollar ever crash in this? Like, when is this going to happen? Because I like all the writings on the wall here, and yet it's pretty strong against the euro right now, and we seem to be able to just keep printing money, and nothing's happening other than gas prices are going.
The mistake is in measuring the purchasing power of the dollar against other fiat currencies.
Fair.
What you need to apply it to is purchases of goods. I mean, if you look at what we're actually paying for our groceries and our gas and everything else, it's quite evident that we are in an inflationary period. But if you compare it to some other piece of shit fiat currency that's being hyperinflated, well, then yes, you're right. We are equally in trouble. It
depends on who's printing faster. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And who's hiking interest rates faster. And that's really not a good way to evaluate these things, because they're both manipulated assets. So I think that ultimately we will see the death of the dollar in our lifetime. I am one of the few libertarians that does not necessarily believe that it's imminent. The Federal Reserve has the power to hike interest rates as aggressively as they want to, and they could absolutely break the back of inflation and send us into a cascading deflationary debt default spiral if they want to. I have no idea what they intend to do. They say that they're going to hike interest rates another 0.5 point 3 times throughout the remainder of the year. That would bring the Fed funds rate over 2%. When you extrapolate those into other borrowing classes, that would be pushing 30-year mortgage rates probably north of 7%. If they were to do so, that would probably start to at least slow, if not really show signs of problems in the real estate market. So I'm not at all certain that this is the death of the dollar now. But because our national debt is so significant, if they hike those interest rates, they now increase their debt servicing costs on the federal level, which makes it very hard for them to function. And they don't like that, so they're stuck between a rock and a hard place, where in the past, the national debt wasn't such a burden that they had to continue to weigh these two factors. You could kind of just continue to keep the pedal to the metal in terms of printing and worry about it in the future. And that's what politicians always do. They worry about it in the future. Well, the future is now, motherfuckers. Like this, we have to decide whether or not we're going to default our economy or our national debt, or we're going to hyperinflate it away. And that's my belief, is like they're going to decide which direction they go. And I think that they're going to hyperinflate it and switch to a central bank digital currency. But that's just a bet. I don't know that for a fact.
Yeah. That's a big issue at Davos, though, and you've seen with the Terra USD and Luna crash that you saw Yellen step in and say, "Hey, maybe we should be regulating stable coins," and you're seeing a lot of talk about CBDCs. So I'm quite concerned about a central bank digital currency, because it's one of the most Orwellian things you can imagine. Yeah,
it's the end game. Yeah. We have to fight it with everything we have. Every single thing that you're concerned about is accurate. From social credit scores to the ability to just, shut down your banking account, which is what we saw with the Ottawa, freedom rally protesters up in Canada. It's a panopticon. It's the end game. We have to fight it.
Yeah. Well, and it's not. This might sound weird to people, but if you have a central bank digital currency, you could easily have prices be dependent on ESG scores and social credit scores and whatever. So I walk into the gas station, and for me, because I'm an asshole and the price of gas is $20 a gallon. But for little Mr. Wokey next to me in his hybrid car, it's $4 a gallon or $3 a gallon or whatever. Because I'm doing bad things online and Facebook doesn't like me, but he's retweeting propaganda from Ukraine or whatever it is that they like.
And by bad things, they mean that you're just arguing in favor of free speech, like
right. Yeah. No, I'm saying things like, "Hey, can we be left alone?" Bad.
Yeah, exactly. So,
right. So let's, there's something related to what you guys brought up, which is this, I forget which one of you were talking about this as a proxy war, maybe both of you.
Yeah, both of us brought it up a bit.
Yeah, I saw something. I'm sure you guys saw this, but let me actually. I'm going to play a clip, because I just want people to see this for themselves. It's quite disturbing. Biden was asked Biden was asked a question this weekend. Let's listen.
You didn't want to get involved in the Ukraine conflict militarily for obvious reasons. Are you willing to get involved militarily to defend Taiwan if it comes to that?
Yes.
You are.
That's the commitment we made.
So a proxy war with one nuclear superpower is not enough. We need two.
I'll let David talk about the insanity of this before I go.
Yeah. So looking at the whole Taiwan situation, well, I mean, like in U.S. foreign policy, since Nixon went over to China, and actually talked to Mao, I believe he talked to Mao, or maybe it was Deng Xiaoping or whoever succeeded Mao.
It was probably Deng Xiaoping by the time Nixon was in office, right?
Yeah, but Nixon went over to China, and it's been U.S. foreign policy that China is actually China, and Taiwan is part of China. That's been U.S. foreign policy. Not saying I necessarily agree with that. I would like to see Taiwan remain as free as possible. But again, getting involved with a nuclear power like that is not something we want. If we want to deter Taiwan from being invaded, well, we need to encourage trade between China and Taiwan. Because you know what? Free trade is the best foreign policy. If you have those two trading with each other and their economies become interlocked, in my mind, what's going to happen? They want to make sure that can continue, and so that way they don't have disruptions in their economy. That doesn't look good for politicians. They want to appease their people. So if they stay more interlocked, then you're less likely to see conflict. But also, I'm not thoroughly convinced that they could take Taiwan. I believe the side that's facing China, the side of Taiwan, is very rocky and not easy to board on. So they have like 4 aircraft carriers, I believe, that have to go all the way around Taiwan while facing bombardment from, an island that has been armed to the teeth by the United States military since like the 50s, and that's been in a somewhat capitalistic economy since then. So I don't know. I'm not thoroughly convinced that they would be able to take Taiwan.
I'm just going to correct myself before Clint, before you jump in. He met with Mao. Nixon met with Mao right before Mao died. So Deng Xiaoping was still in. Yeah. He was still banished at the time. So I was wrong.
Yeah.
Sorry, yeah. Go ahead, I think I think David's right that it's not assured that China wants to do it or that they can do it. I think they want to. I don't know if they can. But it's not our business. And that's
wait, something's happening on this sphere that's not the business of Washington politicians?
Well, in their opinion,
make a note of that.
Yes, in their opinion, it's everything is their business. But in my opinion, as a non-interventionist, it is not our business, and it is. I mean, we have already. No. This would amount to a proxy war, anyways, because as David said, we have already armed them to the teeth. So. Our involvement is inextricable at this point, but I think that David's right that if we allow them to trade, which we have, and they have very aggressively. I mean, they produce the majority of semiconductors on the planet, as far as I know. So, yes. China needs that. America needs
the vast majority. It's not even like 51%. It's like 90-something percent.
Yeah. So there you go. So they have a tremendously strong economy, and as long as they keep positive trading relationship with China. Hopefully this can be averted or avoided. But I don't know. I mean, the fact that we continue to this is kind of similar to what we did with Ukraine and Russia in that we continue to arm one side. We continue to, we overthrew them in Ukraine, and then we just increasingly applied pressure to one side of the conflict, which in that case it was Russia. In this case, it's China. And when we have a deranged invalid president like this who's up there saying that even though we do not have some sort of NATO peace alliance treaty or whatever with these people, we have an agreement to arm them. We do not have an agreement to defend them militarily, which is what he was asked. So he is verbally changing American foreign policy in this regard, and he has now done so multiple times, even though his White House has regularly corrected him, the president, as to what our defense agreement is with them. So I don't know. I personally believe that they are utilizing Biden's dementia to have this dual-faced approach where he gets to take this really war hawky stance And then the White House comes back to China's representatives and say, oh, no, he doesn't mean that, because they're trying to deter it. But at the same time, when you have tensions between two countries, which if you believe they're two separate countries, which Taiwan obviously believes they are, you don't want a foreign power that's in there making things worse. Allow these people to have a conversation. We should not be making it worse for one side or the other. And that's what we're doing right now with Biden going up there and saying dumb shit like he did today and during the campaign and multiple times. It's just insane.
Yeah, and they were playing war games like you saw. I think it was on NBC. They premiered something how they were playing war games, you know, pitting if the United States got involved in stopping China from overtaking Taiwan. And they left out like one tiny little factor, you know, the fact that we're dealing with two nuclear armed nations right now. We would be dealing with China and the United States. China may only have like around 300 nuclear weapons, but that's still enough to pretty much destroy the United States of America if they so chose. And I'm pretty sure we don't want to get into a conflict with, you know, I don't think we want to get into a conflict with a nuclear power nation. That's like the single stupidest thing ever. I remember Scott Horton was talking about in a speech to the Utah Libertarian Party. He was talking about how Dick Cheney, when he came into the office and he saw the plans if Russia had launched a nuclear weapon or China launched a nuclear weapon, the amount of nuclear, the coverage disgusted Dick Cheney. And we're talking about the guy who shot a guy in the face during a duck hunt. Or maybe it was a quail hunt. I'm not totally sure. But this is the guy who's responsible for partially responsible for the war in Iraq. He was disgusted by how brutal the United States' response to a nuclear weapon launch was. Do we really want to be dealing with this? This is world ending. I care more about, you know, people in my town not being incinerated in a nuclear blast more than I care about the people in Taiwan. I'm sorry. That's just that's how I personally feel. I care more about my family not being incinerated in a ball of flame first and not losing the world. Like, I'll pray for Taiwan. I hope Taiwan succeeds if it ever does somehow come to a military conflict, but we should stop escalating this conflict, and we need to stop acting like we can just play God when there's nuclear weapons involved.
And this is what offends me most, is that when you say things like that, where you say, I care more about my neighbors than I do about the Ukrainians or the Taiwanese, people go, oh, you uncaring bastard. It's like, everyone feels that way. Do you value your family more than you do strangers? Of course you do. And it's this is not some like nationalistic approach as much as it is just a realistic one. We value our family and our friends more than we do people we've never met. That's just human nature. And ultimately, it's not our problem. It's not our issue. It's not our region. It's not our territory. And it's not our business. So I stand strongly opposed to this and to the Ukraine and Russia meddling that we have propagated for the past 8 years. It's just suicide. And I strongly believe that this is a product of a defense of the dying dollar reserve system. I really think that's how they perceive it. If they stop trading in US dollars, that means that we have to suddenly become fiscally sane. And our government is not prepared to do that. Not with the amount of national debt that we have. They simply cannot do it. They will not do it. And they would rather see foreigners die than us have to start to spend within our means. And if you want to talk about who is, morally bankrupt, start there. Don't start with people like David and I. It's absurd.
Yeah. No, I mean, and they conflate this often with the statement that you care more about your community than you might care about some Taiwanese people. They conflate it with you wishing the Taiwanese people harm. Like, I don't wish the Taiwanese people any harm at all. But something that strikes me is we seem to never be willing to fight the philosophical and intellectual war at all. Like we're not really saying, and then we don't give it time to work. Like for example, right now, Xi Jinping is under a lot of fire, even from his own CCP. Like, a lot of people are very upset with his zero COVID policy. They're upset with his support for Russia. Like, just because he's in power now and has near dictatorial control doesn't mean he always will. It doesn't mean that we need to shoot people to change status quo in Asia. It means that we need to educate people. We need to explain to them the values. They need to see the value of having a more free society. And this stuff takes time, and I don't think personally, I think we overestimate China's willingness to even go after Taiwan, because they need the microprocessors just as much as we do. They need Taiwan's economy to not be destroyed, and a war in Taiwan would devastate, I think, China just as much as it would devastate anywhere
and they have
else.
over 1 billion people to feed too. So this, I mean, the problem is that he has been taking some steps to to insulate his economy. They've been stockpiling wheat. They do look as if they are at least preparing for the potential for war. Whether that means Taiwan or if they just think that this is a threat from the U.S., I don't know. I don't know which. But regardless, we have now put them on the defensive, on the back foot. And really, the problem is that we lost the moral high ground. We are no longer that shining city on the hill that gets to say, look at how free we are, be like us. We locked down our economy for 2 fucking years like a bunch of lunatics. So now there is no example. There is no, moral high ground from which we can preach to these people and say there's a better way to live. Look at us. It's like, well, I guess DeSantis could, but the rest of the country pretty much can't.
Right.
So that's a big problem. And this is why I'm so, distraught over the trajectory of this nation, is that, we used to be that and we aren't anymore.
Yeah.
And we're using things like China's social credit system as a muse to come up with our own stuff, and we've got our own ESG. So when I think that the quote propaganda coming from the Chinese government about how horrible our government is and how authoritarian it is, like a lot of the propaganda is around that kind of stuff. It only works because it lands with people, because it's real. Like, oh, it is a legitimate. I mean, it's basically just saying, you too, right? But
right,
it's not. It doesn't mean China's good. But we've given them plenty of moral ammunition to use against us.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Not to mention their economy is kind of screwed. I believe their central bank is probably just as bad as the Fed. They're building like ghost cities, because they're trying to hire people, make sure that they have jobs and keep their economy going. So they keep building these ghost cities, investing in these projects that just where no one goes. They keep building things that nobody occupies at all. And so their housing market, it's ready to collapse. I believe it's like a third.
Keynesianism.
Yeah, I believe it's like a third of their economy. And if it just collapses, and trust me, these sort of things do collapse, it's going to hurt the Chinese economy badly. And I mean,
they're literal Potemkin villages. I mean, they really are.
I agree more with Trump in that it's an economic war more than anything, but I don't think he approached it the right way. He decided to engage in protectionism rather than, actually letting free markets show that we're better than their whatever fascistic, communist, capitalist pseudo system they've got. Why not let the free market actually show that it works?
Well, and look, for if you want to fight an ideological war over the long term, one of the most effective things that we've done against Chinese communism, and I hesitate to even call it communism because it's Deng Xiaoping kind of threw that out the window and was like, it's, authoritarianism. But one of the most effective things we've done is have trade with China, because people come here, they learn that, hey, I'm free to go on Facebook and to talk about what I want and whatever. And then they go home to China and they start to ask, well, why can't I do this? And they push back and they have, I guess we need VPNs to get around the government. It does change. It takes a long time, but part of how cultures change is through exchange. And the most valuable thing America had to export in the past was our culture. Now, I'm not sure, it's more of a poison, but one of the most valuable things we had to export in the past was the culture of liberty. And we didn't. Instead, we mouthed about democracy and armed a bunch of terrorists for decades. And it didn't work out so well.
Not to mention, we've just been exporting the dollar. Like the dollar that's been dying, we keep exporting that in the form of debt to China and buying more and more goods. And you know what? It's not very useful. Like that's how we kind of lessen the impact here at home. We export it abroad, make it China's problem to deal with a devaluing dollar. And you know what? That's going to hurt them in the long run. That's why they probably want to stop buying our debt, and debt monetization happens.
Yeah, and it's not just China; it's every country. I mean, we have been exporting our inflation to the rest of the world, and you see many third world countries that suffer because of it. Sri Lanka is, currently in a revolution because of it. So, yeah, there is a knock-on effect or blowback, if you will, that we don't necessarily feel in the present, But other countries feel now, and we will eventually feel ourselves when the chickens come home to roost. This game can't last in perpetuity, and it will not.
Yeah. Let me do a few super chats because we've had a bunch and I've been ignoring them. So let me jump in. Some of them are directly for you. I don't even know what this is about. Christopher Baker says, Clint, what happened with you and Pete Quinones? Is that a thing? Did you not want to?
Yeah, I mean, I've addressed it on my show. I'd really rather not rehash.
That's fine. I don't even know what it's about. So I don't whatever. Christopher Baker also says, Angela McCardle, the next chair of LP National.
I will be a delegate in Reno, and let us pray that that's the case. I think we vote on this Friday, so we'll get to decide. And there's about 1,000 delegates, and I hope that if I'm the deciding vote, that'll be incredible. But maybe democracy will work for once.
Yeah, well, I'm not going to cross my fingers. No offense to the official Libertarian Party. I know you're both officially involved, but as a guy who's been free market dude for 25 years, I've kind of given up on. It's like, oh, Joe Jorgensen now. Thanks, guys. Like that's good. Let me know when you pull your head out of your ass and have.
Well, I'm literally.
Don't you want to be a?
I'm literally letting you know right now, Carter. We are pulling our heads out of our asses currently. Yeah. So
I have hope. Better. The Mises Caucus gives me hope. I'll just say that the Mises Caucus gives me hope. So, Judge Lott says, Clint, can you put Carter in touch with Ryan Dawson? I don't know who that is. If not, Reed Coverdale probably can, but I don't even know who Ryan Dawson is.
Oh, you'll know who Ryan Dawson is soon.
Yeah, I could put you in touch, but if you value your YouTube channel, you may not want to have him on. I don't know. He's probably the most censored man on the internet.
Oh, really? All right.
Oh, yeah. He's been nuked from every platform.
And PayPal.
Yeah, everything.
Nice.
He's on the front lines of the unbanking of the unclean.
Excellent. Well, that's worth a conversation. Christopher Baker says, if magic made the entire world free tomorrow, half the world would throw that freedom away in 100 years. Many want to live under dictators.
You know, I don't know about that, honestly. I think most people are not willing to be leaders. They're more willing to be, kind of like followers, kind of, some might say sheep. But I think that if it became appealing enough, they would just follow, free market people like Clint here. He's somewhat inspiring. I think that a larger portion of people would just follow him.
Son, how dare you? No, I mean, I agree with you that if given the choice, if you actually were to see what a free nation looks like versus a totalitarian one, the majority probably would choose the free one. The problem is that these people are so severely propagandized that they don't know which is which, and they think that the freedom oriented society is the evil one and the top down technocratic state one is the good one. Many people in America believe that these days, and that's something I really never expected. I never thought that we could get here, but after the lockdowns, you really have to reassess your faith in your fellow man, which is why I've become more of an advocate for secession than I am, reform of the federal U.S. government. I just think that there are at least 30-40% of the people in this country that strongly believe that lockdowns during a pandemic is the way to go. And I don't want to live in a country with people like that. It's just too dangerous. Yeah.
I mean, there's kind of, this is a question I've been thinking about for a while, and I'm also on your side, Clint. I don't know where David you are, but I'm also more of the, let's just get in a lifeboat somewhere and you guys can have your Obamacare and everything else you want and your Fauci idol. But I think there's a couple, there's two different issues that I see. One is I think intellectually supporting freedom requires I'm going to sound like an arrogant jerk, but supporting freedom requires a high functioning prefrontal cortex with the ability to long-term project and understand that like this minor thing that's a discomfort will eventually work itself out in the free market. And the other thing it requires is I think there's no shortage of people in the US who want to be left alone, but there's a dearth of people who are willing to leave others alone. And that's a psychological issue, right? There's a lot of people who will say, yeah, leave me alone. And then it's like, okay, great. Clint's going to go rub Jello on his body and run naked down the street. And it's like, well, there needs to be a law against that. Like that, we need to stop Clint. I don't like it.
Trust me, they've stopped him many a time.
What am I supposed to do with all this Jello? I have to use it somehow.
Yeah. It's a long-term problem. So to me, it's like, well, look, the human race needs to change in some way. And in the meantime, we need a lifeboat of people who are already willing to leave each other alone. And
New Hampshire, my friend, New Hampshire. I'm an advocate.
Are you in New Hampshire, David?
I'm not in New Hampshire, but I'm an advocate for the Free State Project because that's the dream. The dream is to move to New Hampshire, man. That's the goal. But like New Hampshire, they're actually doing it. They're concentrating libertarians, people who care about personal liberty and freedom and property rights. And they're all congregating in New Hampshire. And you know what? They're actually winning. They're the freest state in the nation. Sorry, Florida.
No, it's true.
I know Clint's not one of the die-hard Florida or die people.
No. I mean, I am.
You're
freedom
a fan.
Or die. But I am a fan of Florida, but ultimately you're right. I mean, the Free State Project is the it's the proving grounds for libertarians. I mean, they have an opportunity to really show what our ideology amounts to in reality. And I'm thrilled that they are pursuing it so aggressively. Pork Fest is this annual event where libertarians from all over the world come together, and it'll be in New Hampshire in about a month now, almost exactly a month. Yep. And I'll be giving 2-hour-long speeches to those lunatics, and I can't wait. I've never been to New Hampshire. I've never been to Pork Fest, so this is going to be incredible. I get to actually see what this amounts to on the ground. So I'll report back, but I am a huge believer in ideological segregation, simply because there's not enough people in this country that truly believe in I don't even think that they're libertarian principles as much as they are the fundamental principles of America, of the founding fathers. What I was indoctrinated to believe we fought for when we fought for independence. Those are the beliefs I still hold to this day, and I just want to be with people that cherish those beliefs and are willing to sacrifice in the present to attain them again. It's we had a lot of generations that suffered, and I don't mean World War II and Korea and all these other wars that really were not a threat to America. I mean the founding fathers, the ones that threw off the greatest empire in the world at the time and fought and bled for independence. And I really cherish that ideal, and I'm willing to carry on that torch of liberty to come hell or high water.
Yeah. Well, Pork Fest. I have been to Pork Fest. It is great.
Oh, nice.
I judged a startup pitch competition at Pork Fest last year. I don't know if they're going to do it again, but it's all kinds. You see, if you want to experience what liberty feels like, you go to Pork Fest, and it's people with like hippie looking people smoking pot, and conservative looking people with ties, and everyone's just there, and they're all chilling, leaving each other alone, and not complaining about their neighbors or whatever. It's kind of cool. So,
Sounds
all right,
beautiful.
Clint, what should we be talking about that we aren't talking about?
Well, the biggest thing that I've been kind of spreading the message on is ESG. If more people are familiar already with the concept of social credit scores, that was considered conspiracy theory nonsense 5 years ago. Now we have seen it get rolled out pretty aggressively in China, so people are more willing to accept that, yeah, there are a lot of really crazy dictator-like people on the planet that believe that you should have social credit scores that dictate how you get treated as a citizen in your country. This is, to put it very simply, an extrapolation of that belief, kind of a backdoor implementation of social credit scores by applying corporate credit scores, where every multinational business that wants to receive any sort of funding has to function in a way that gets them rated by S&P and these other big ratings companies, including the Klaus Schwabs and World Economic Forums of the world, that get to sit up there and say, your environmental, your social, your government score, it adds up to X. X means that you are good. Good means that BlackRock and Vanguard and State Street will now purchase your stock, which will allow you to thrive. And it is a incredibly nefarious backdoor to Marxism, because what ESG amounts to, despite all of the bells and whistles and the good sounding nature of it, is an implementation of Marxism. It is stakeholder capitalism replacing shareholder capitalism. And shareholder was what we're accustomed to, which is capitalism, and stakeholder is the employees and the diversity of your board and how you treat the economy. And every Democrat talking point, it's all tied up with a bow, and you get a score stamped on you. And then these huge money managers that have north of 20 trillion under management already. Some people think it's already over 50 trillion. It's estimated it'll be clearly over 50 trillion by 2025. I mean, that is enormous sums of money. You can absolutely reimagine the economy. If you reimagine the economy, you can reimagine society in your image. And I do not like the image they are trying to reimagine us into. So that is the story that we ought to be focusing on. And I am doing everything in my power to make this the libertarian talking point of 2022. We have to be on the front line of this. We had an opportunity to do so when it came to lockdowns, which is why I titled my show Liberty Lockdown when I started after I retired from being a mortgage broker. This is now the new hill to die on, and we absolutely have to be the vanguard in this fight, because if we intend to wake up anybody that thinks that the libertarians are crazy, we've got to be on the front lines informing them of what is happening, why it's happening, why is wokeism taking over your nation, your culture, even though you hate it every step of the way. Why is it happening? This is why. ESG.
Yep. And I just to be clear for people that don't understand, the way ESG works is your ESG score takes a hit if you do business with someone who doesn't have a good ESG score. So this is how it spreads like a virus. So if you have control at the top, where you have people affiliated with central banks and controlling, like you're saying, maybe $50 trillion worth of capital, that, to use a Reagan phrase, that trickles down, and it trickles down in a way so that if you want to open, let's say you want to open a bakery, right, in your small town, or you want to sell mugs online, or whatever you want to do, and you get a little business. Well, let's say you have to get a business loan, or you have to have a payment processor, or you have to get a web hosting company, or whatever, all the partners that you need to do that a normal business would need. Well, they may be under obligation to only do business with you if you meet certain ESG, even your tiny bit, if you meet certain ESG score criteria. And because the people that they do business with, the banks or whatever, the people up the food chain economically, they are requiring them to have this ESG and adopt this program. And so it really is a way to spread an ideology through coercion virally.
Bingo. You nailed it. I mean, and this is the thing I try and really drive home. It's not brand new. I think it was Kofi Annan in 2004 wrote a letter to 50 of the biggest corporations on the planet, basically laying out this idea of shifting from shareholder to stakeholder capitalism. And what do you know? The biggest money managers on earth responded positively, which makes no fucking sense. But they saw very quickly that they could continue to accumulate power while suppressing any sort of populist uprising from the left against them for their greed and their pursuit of wealth and all these things that the left hates, by just shining it over with a bunch of woke language, and that's what they're doing. So the game is transparent once you understand it, but it's very complicated for people to understand, because very few people understand how economics works, and very few people understand how this is actually being implemented. It sounds so nefarious and so conspiratorial. It's very hard to express it in a way that doesn't come off as conspiratorial, but they're doing it in open. I mean, you have these people at Davos right now, at the World Economic Forum right now, that are going to talk about this openly right now. You could go listen to these people, and they will talk about how they intend to reimagine your entire existence, from what you consume to what you put in your body, what you must put in your body, what you must not put in your body. I mean, these people are they're totalitarian, and they're open about it, and they think that they're good, which is the scariest part about it. They honestly believe that they are good people and that they know better than you, and they will implement their worldview upon you, whether you like it or not, and it's for your benefit. And when you have bad actors that believe that they're doing a good thing, they are extraordinarily dangerous. So it's vitally important that the American people in particular wake up to this, divest, in my opinion, of, this is not financial advice, of money managers like BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street, anybody that is implementing this ESG mechanism for control, you have to divest yourself if you intend to fight it. They can still go to the Fed window, which is why we ultimately need to end the Federal Reserve too, if we're going to really prevail over this. But we can apply pressure now. Let them know that we know what's happening and we don't like it and we're not going to participate anymore. That's how you start fight. It may not be the end, but it's the beginning at least.
Maybe we need an anti-ESG certification.
There's already one that's being rolled out. Vivek Ramaswamy, actually, I forget the name of it, but there is a ETF or whatever it's called that is not focusing on that. They are focusing on, the best companies. What a novel concept.
Crap. I don't know, man. I don't know if we can prevent the rollout of this totally. So I feel like we have to form a parallel economy at this point. Decouple from that one, get into our own. And that's where I think Bitcoin's important. I've been criticized because I recently just jumped on the Bitcoin trade. But you know what? I see that as really our only hope. If we need to get out of fiat. We need to get out of there so that way we don't get screwed over when ESG happens. Not your keys, not your coins. You need to actually be able to control your currency, where it's sent, how it's sent, and we need to make our own economy so we don't have to rely on this totalitarian state and pray that we don't say the wrong thing, otherwise we'd be silenced.
Yeah, I mean, a couple things. First, I just want to point this out so people understand historically. Progressivism was technocracy. I mean, it's like the late 19th century. Read the progressives; they are all about a dictatorship of technocrats. That's what they're about. So it's amazing that they write things and they say them out in the open, and then when you repeat them, you're the person who's crazy, conspiracy theory, whatever. But this is what they've been saying. As Clint pointed out, the ESG stuff isn't new. A lot of these aren't. In fact, King Camp Gillette, who's the founder of Gillette, way back when he founded Gillette, I don't know how, 100 years ago, a long time ago, he had a vision for basically Marxism / fascism. I mean, there's actually not a lot of difference between Marxism and fascism in the sense that, one guy controls everything or a small committee that votes for the chairman control everything. I mean, it's not really that different. But his view, his path, so the Marxist path has traditionally been you get the proletariat riled up and they're going to, actually, they never are the ones who overthrow. It's always the intellectuals, but whatever. You get the proletariat riled up, they're going to, overthrow the evil kulaks and bourgeois, and then you get your Marxist utopia. His vision was, well, instead of doing that, what you could do is build a really successful company, and that company gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and it subsumes more and more things, and other companies that are getting bigger and bigger, and eventually they merge, and it eventually just subsumes the entire economy and kind of merges with the government, and voila, you end up with centralized authoritarian control over the entire economy, but you've done it not through the route of holding up Marxist signs and wearing Che Guevara shirts, but you've done it through the route of building BlackRock and investing in companies and building a coalition of companies that just eventually become managed under one roof. And I think that's what we're literally seeing that being implemented right now in front of us.
Well, you understand it very well. This is a backdoor to Marxism. It really is. And instead of using all of the language of the early 1900s, they are now using, the wokest language, and people have been indoctrinated through the colleges to believe that equity and inclusion and all these good sounding words are what we ought to be pursuing above all other ideals, and that's why it's popular, and that's why they will allow it to just spread like a virus. And there is no mask that works to stop this one either. So we have to find ways to do it in a creative fashion. I think that David's right. Certainly, separating those that are in the know into their own economic model, if you will, is a good starting place to have a competing model. But ultimately, as long as they have the central banks and they're able to print and they have a monopoly on violence, and you also have the vast majority of people in America and across the planet that don't understand what's transpiring, you are really leaving billions of sheep to the wolves if you only intend on separating yourself off. And perhaps I'm too, I don't know, too much of a bleeding heart to just give up on the other 7 billion people on this planet, but I'm not willing yet. You know, I'm gonna try and get this to be a national movement. And if I fail in that, then I will, you know, extricate myself to New Hampshire or wherever this exclusive freedom market oriented economy exists.
You know, I almost feel like ESG would be the perfect vessel for them to implement something like Harrison Bergeron. You know, it's this old novel where they believe we all have to be equal. So what they do is they take steps to make sure that nobody gets ahead. If there's someone who's fast, what they do is they tie weights around someone's ankles so that way they can't run fast. Stuff like that. Oh, everyone else is you're managing to eat, but everyone else is starving. Sorry, your ESG score went up a bit. So you know what happens there, fella? You got to cut back on eating properly. It's terrifying. It's totalitarian. Like
you're eating more than your fair share of steak or whatever it is, right? Like, yeah, you're more than your fair share of housing or whatever. It's
but see that this is why it's so transparently fraudulent. These people fly on their private jets to World Economic Forum, you know, conversations to talk about how us peasants are polluting the world and we're gonna have global warming because of it. They never apply it to themselves because they believe that they are superior to us. Like they have already decided, as you said, you know, you have this small cabal of technocratic elites that get together. Well, in Marxism, you know, they believe that everyone will be equal, but it's not the case. In any sort of economic system, whether it's totalitarian or otherwise, you're going to have some resources, that scarce resources, and you're going to have some people that get the majority of it, and they have to have each other's back. You know, they have to come to each other's defense because they realize that if the peons, the people that they hate, us, realize what's happening, we're not going to allow it to persist. So this is why they pursue people like Elon Musk when he tries to acquire Twitter. Even though some conspiracy theorists think he's in on it, I don't necessarily believe that. They don't want us to be able to speak freely, because if we can speak freely, this is something that has the power to wake up a lot of people, and they cannot allow that. So that's, in my opinion, that's why the suppression on internet conversations has become so aggressive, be it YouTube or Twitter or wherever else. Is that this is it? This is the end game. Like if they can actually implement this, if they can implement social credit scores, along with the incredible improvements in spying technology that exists, it's over. Like they will have accomplished it. And this is why it's such an existential fight for those that do understand what's happening. We cannot allow them to prevail. This is not something you can bounce back from.
Yeah, they're building the dystopian infrastructure right now.
100%.
Yeah. And, you know, one thing I just want to point out to people, because I think a lot of people don't, you know, they assume that someone who's, let's say, managing BlackRock, they're just only driven by money, and that's not true. I mean, look, when you can't feed your kids, you're driven by money because you love your kids. You're really driven by love, but you're driven by, you know, money's a big deal, right? So when you have $10,000 in the bank, money's a bigger deal than when you have $100,000 in the bank. But it's less of a deal when you have $1 million. It's less of a deal when you have $10 million. When you have $100 million or $1 billion in the bank, money is not your driving factor anymore. The difference in lifestyle between being a billionaire and a 10 billionaire is pretty minor. But the difference in what you start to focus on, I think what a lot of these people start to focus on is power. They want the power and prestige and whatever else that they feel they need to get with the money. Not everyone does that, but that's why you have, you know, that's why you have these people. You wonder, like, well, why would they agree? Why would BlackRock? Why when Kofi Annan sent this letter to 10 companies or however many it was, you said, like,
50.
Why would they agree to this? 50 companies. Like, why would they agree to this? Well, they're not primarily led by maximizing profits anymore. They have other concerns. They want to get invited to the right cocktail party. It's as simple as this. They want to get invited to the right cocktail parties and be able to have power in the right circles and control things. Like that's what they want. And if changing their profit schedule gets them that, then okay.
Yeah, well, and also when you have this level of wealth, you can have a longer time horizon. If you're just trying to keep your head above water and feed your family, you can't really think about 2 years down the road. When you have billions in the bank, you can think about decades in the future. And I think that's what they've done. And also, money is only one aspect of power. Money is an important aspect of it, but it's not everything. You could see, very wealthy people that have been put in prison recently. So it's not the state, and the ability to manipulate the monopoly on violence is kind of the final frontier of power accumulation. And these people have done so. I mean, they have done it. They now have the ability to dictate what 7 billion people across the planet do when a virus comes out, whether they were involved in the creation of it or anything like that. I won't say because we're on YouTube, but this is pretty crazy stuff. So yeah, it's everything, man. I really believe this is the fight of our lives, and the lockdowns were the trial run to see what they could get away with, and they got away with basically everything. So now
they were very pleased with the results.
Yes. So now they're going to look at that and go, well, now let's see about whether or not we can just give over all national autonomy to supranational organizations like the UN or the what's the other one? I'm forgetting.
World Economic Forum, World Health Organization. What are you
WHO? For? That's the one I was looking for. So
it's a UN division, right? I think.
Yeah. So same difference, but it's more targeted towards pandemic scares, which we now have the monkeypox scare, and it's like, I mean, it all becomes so obvious once you take that first red pill and you start to really go down this path of like trying to learn about it. And I was very fortunate because I had such an in-depth understanding of high finance because of the career that I was in, that this clicked for me very quickly, and I realized that my Austrian economics background paired with my libertarian background paired with my economic expertise just made me the perfect messenger for this, because I can try and take all of these disparate concepts and funnel them down into something that is hopefully palatable, that will hopefully wake people up. And if I'm successful, hopefully we can prevent this, because it's, like I've said, it's really the end game.
Yeah. David, you were talking about parallel economy with Bitcoin. I mean, I like Bitcoin. I was a cryptographer back in the late 90s. I mean, like I'm a Bitcoin supporter. I'm an Ethereum supporter. But the aside from the technical issues with Bitcoin itself, I mean, at the end of the day, one of the issues here is unless you're using a privacy coin, all of this is traceable. And B, at some point, you can't eat digital assets. You need to buy real items in the real world. And if we do have an environment in which there is a monopoly on the use of force from people who are opposed to the medium of exchange that we're using, how does a parallel economy save us from that? I'm not trying to be a naysayer. I don't have the answer.
I mean, look at it already. You have like a war on drugs, and you see drug dealers. They still do it anyways. They control the currency, and you see drug dealers. They still exist, right? I mean, maybe I'm making sort of like the agorist argument here, where the black market and the gray markets, they will survive, because the state, if it's one thing, it's incompetent. It will miss things, and so it is. So if you have the ability to take the shot to do it, it's always good to do so. I mean, look at New Hampshire. New Hampshire has the highest use of like cryptocurrency use amongst its people. That, like, I believe there's even gas stations where you can pay for your gas in crypto. I mean, you're already starting to see it sprout up, like the infrastructure where people are adopting crypto, and they're coming up with these ideas of like, what if I accept Bitcoin as a currency? I understand. Like, the state seems against Bitcoin, but you know what? Ultimately, it's impossible to stop unless they like shut down the internet or all of our electricity, which by then we'll have bigger problems than them dealing with Bitcoin if it gets to that.
Well, I mean, tell that to Ross Albright is all I would say. Is like, okay, like how big of a black market can you have? I mean, look, obviously we're all against the war on drugs, I think, on this podcast, right? So I'm. It's cool that there's a black market and someone's on the street dealing whatever. I mean, I don't necessarily think it's healthy or good for them, but
No.
okay, fine. There's a black market there, but I don't want to, like, to get hamburger meat for my family, I don't want to have to go into the black market and risk being imprisoned to feed my family. And that's what you're talking about when you say, like, well, it'll be widespread and they can't stop it. It's like, well, they can. All they need to do is throw a few people in jail and make an example of them, a few like normal people, so that I look at my neighbor and go, crap, he's just like me. And all he did was conduct his business in, well, let's say it's not Bitcoin, but whatever, AVAX, right? And he is in jail now and estranged from his children and whatever. So I'm not trying to be a naysayer and dystopian, but I'm trying to think about solutions. Like, what do you possibly do in a world where there is no safe haven from jackboots with guns who will shoot you for buying lettuce with Bitcoin?
I mean, it's making calculated risks, really. It's about knowing whether or not what are the possible consequences here. What do you think your chances are of success and making that best educated decision here? Don't take needless risks that you can't sustain the consequences for, or that aren't worth the possible fines that you might deal with. It's kind of like the agorist mentality. I'm not an agorist, though. I'll be completely honest. I'm just a fan of counter economics. But yeah, I don't know. I understand the concern. I also feel like that's why sustainability is something we really need to embrace. Like, I'm seeing right now, like when they're talking about like food shortages, that's not something that's terrifying. The idea that you might not be able to feed your family, and what the government has done to our food system with like all their mass subsidies of like all of these terrible products that are terrible for you to kind of cover up for their poor monetary policy. I mean, people should be growing their own food. They really should. And I really hope they do. People start to pick up that idea. Not like the weird Antifa guys were in Chaz, with their failed little garden, but like actually like learn to grow your own food, raise your own animals, because I think it's important.
Well, this is where the hardcore Second Amendment libertarian aspect comes into play, really. And it's going to sound Fed posty, but it's the truth. We have to have some sort of consolidation of our population into a place like New Hampshire, and then we have to have mutual defense agreements. This is also why I've become involved in the Mises Caucus so heavily, is because I think that you're going to have political defense. And if you can take over the local sheriff with people that believe what you believe, if you can take over the local, mayor or governor, God willing, in New Hampshire, then you have a real fighting chance of making it extraordinarily costly for the federal government to try and implement their rule over your people. And I think that's where we're headed right now, is that New Hampshire will eventually be in that position, and then it'll become a game of chicken with the feds as to whether or not they want to, send in the military or, the National Guard or something to try and arrest some people that have stopped paying taxes, for instance, in New Hampshire, things like that. So yeah, but you're right. I mean, if you look at the kulaks, whether or not you're sustaining yourself when it comes to food, if you have a nation that is starving because of central planning gone, run amok, they will take those crops, and you're going to have to defend those crops.
Yep.
Because that's how you stay alive. So
and it's like, what is your alternative here? Like, if you start, like, they could seize gold just as easily and stop you from transacting in gold. Like, you either stay on the fiat debt slavery option, you go to central bank digital currencies, or you try to stake it out and take the risk for a little bit more freedom. I mean, I don't know if we necessarily have a choice at this point. You either embrace fiat and central bank digital currencies, or you take a little bit of risk. And I don't know if you guys are willing to take the risk or not, but you know what? I'm going to take that risk that they might crack down on Bitcoin more than staying on this death mission that'll lead to me and my family starving.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, on that note, David, what should we be talking about that we're not?
Well, speaking of starving, there's been a ceasefire in the conflict in Yemen. I think a 2-month ceasefire began in, let me quickly make sure that I have the right date, April 3rd. April 3rd. They began a 2-month...
Is Raytheon on that? That sounds like a problem.
Yeah, you'd think that, but it was between the Saudis and the Houthis themselves. Like the United States didn't get involved, so we have a 2-month ceasefire going on in Yemen, which is pretty great. But the fact that they haven't talked about the war in Yemen at all is kind of what I wanted to touch on. They don't touch at all about like the genocide that we're perpetuating there. Ever since I believe it was 2015, we began that conflict in Yemen, where we aided the Saudis in their practical genocide of the people in Yemen by the bombing of civilian structures such as water sources, hospitals, internet access, anything they need to basically live and be human beings. We have destroyed. They have cholera outbreaks, and you know what the United States allows the Saudis to do? To bomb hospitals. We are doing that, and we are allowing them to blockade Yemen and prevent them from being able to feed their people. That is something that we've completely ignored, and it's disgusting. But right now, there's a little bit of glimmer of hope for the people of Yemen in this 2-month ceasefire, and they even stopped the blockade for it. So hopefully, maybe this will be grounds for more peace. But you know what? Biden lied when he said that he was going to stop the conflict in Yemen. He was like, we're going to stop funding the Saudis. We're going to stop giving them weapons. We're going to stop training them. And you know what he did? He continued to sell weapons to the Saudi Arabians for defensive purposes that could easily just be switched around and become offensive weapons against the poor Houthis, who, you know what? They just didn't want a puppet government over there. That's why they revolted.
And this is part of the petrodollar once again. The reason that Biden can't stop arming Saudi Arabia is because if they do, Saudi Arabia will sell their oil and gas to China or Russia in currencies that are not the US dollar. And this is why we have to get off of the US dollar reserve system and the Federal Reserve. I know I keep going back to it, but it is really the root of all evil.
Yeah, I was just going to say it's the root of all evil. I mean, now we don't actually get most of our gas from Saudi Arabia, though, do we? But it's a significant fiscal impact if they go denominate in something other than dollars.
I believe. Go ahead, Clint. Sorry, you're probably more informed on this.
No, I was just going to say. I mean, he's right, but it's the demand for the dollar that maintains its purchasing power. So if an asset as big as that, which is billions of dollars of transactions annually, stops being exchanged in dollars, which means that the people that want to buy it have to accumulate those dollars. Well, then you have a diminishing demand, which means that the underpinning of the value of that currency decreases. And that's kind of what we're experiencing now, which is why when Biden picked up the phone to call them 6 months ago to increase oil and gas, they told him to kick rocks. They wouldn't even pick up his phone. They want to apply pressure to us. And this is for these types of countries, it's really the only asset they have. So they have to use this, prudently. They have to decide, are we going to be in bed with America, or are we going to shift to the bipolar world order where, or multipolar world order where China and Russia are a more valuable trading partner? And this is the fight that we're witnessing, not just in Saudi Arabia, but many countries, many central banks and governments across the world.
Do you see Russia and China collaborating on a anti-petrodollar initiative?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if they'll actually collaborate entirely, but they are collaborating right now. I mean, they have replaced, I forget what the name of it is, but they have replaced the SWIFT system essentially because the US kicked Russia off, which was completely insane. I mean, that is also a threat to the petrodollar system, or the US reserve currency system. And they forced Russia to start to use China's version of SWIFT. And China is, rapidly realizing what all these other countries are realizing, that this is how the US has controlled, the geopolitical sphere for my entire life and much longer. And if they intend to have autonomy when it comes to their region, they have no choice but to do what David was just talking about when it comes to creating their own economic system. And that's what's happening. And that's why the U.S. Hegemonic militaristic rule is looking so insane right now, where we're risking nuclear wars with the two biggest nuclear powers besides us, because this is really what this is about. It's existential. It's how the U.S. government has maintained its control, and if it stops, our control mechanisms are done. We can't do it anymore. And that actually pivots back into your earlier point about like, how does agorism survive under a totalitarian government like the US? Well, it won't, but it also, I don't think that the US government can sustain itself, because the dollar will eventually hyperinflate, and in that situation they'll no longer be able to pay their soldiers, which means that they can no longer implement their rules over these autonomous, New Hampshire regions, or whatever we end up calling it.
Right.
Yeah. So I kind of want to point out, because like Yemen is the worst thing that's happening in the world. Maybe a little bit less now that they've got the ceasefire and now that we're risking nuclear war with Russia, But like it single-handedly, it was the worst thing in the world until that ceasefire started happening. So like they have a population of 30 million, 20 million of which were in need of humanitarian assistance.
Wow.
14.5 million who did not have enough food. 4 million people had been displaced as a result. And the United Nations has estimated that the war has killed over 377,000 people. I'm assuming by the time we get more accurate numbers, it'd be around 500,000. What we are doing is we are allowing them to systemically kill these poor innocent people. Because you know what happened? To kind of walk you a little bit through the story quickly is I believe their dictator Hadi. I believe he was kicked out of power, and Hillary Clinton. Well, he was sick. He got sent to Saudi Arabia, and for like medical treatment. And while he was gone, Hillary Clinton was like, "This is how we offboard him." And so they held an election. They were like, "Here's your purple thumbs." You've seen those images, right? Where like you get one man, one vote. Well, the thing is, there was only one person on the ballot. I think that might have been Hadi. I don't recall the original dictator's name. I'm not as good with these names as Scott Horton is. So he comes into power, and the Houthis, they don't like this, that the United States has essentially put in a puppet government into their capital. And so what they do is they overthrow the government there. And Saudi Arabia does not like this. They want to put Hadi back in power. And so they begin to launch these wars because they're upset about the Iran deal, and that we gave Iran consent. We basically allowed Iran to take control of Iraq in the form of the Dawa Party after the Second Iraq War. So what happens here is they're like, "Hey, US, you're going to pay us back, right? Because you've been screwing up all of our stuff." And we decide to appease them by aiding in their genocide in Yemen, which they also have the United Arab Emirates as a part of their little coalition. And you know who else is in that coalition? Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. We are arming the people who perpetrated the attacks on 9/11, who bombed the USS Cole. All of those people, we are giving them funding to fight the Houthis right now. And then, you know what we're doing? We're helping bomb civilians and kill them, destroy their hospitals, destroy their water sources, and prevent them from getting the opportunity to eat. That is what we are doing in the Arabian Peninsula right now, and it's disgusting. Saudi Arabia is basically a puppet state of the United States government. You know what the United States government should do? They should tell them to stop. If we care about democracy or human rights like we claim to when we want to try to start conflicts with China. You know what we should do? We should stop the one that we're actively involved in and that we're causing right now. That is what we should be stopping right now.
Yeah, David's right about all that, and this is what I was talking about with the the moral high ground, that we no longer have it. I mean, Yemen is the poorest country in the poorest region of the world. So, and when he said there's somewhere between 350 and 500,000 people that have died during this war, keep in mind the majority are not it's not from bombs dropping on their heads. The majority are the most egregious deaths you can imagine, which is starvation and disease and all sorts of things that are totally avoidable. So it is a tragedy, and the U.S. taxpayer, whether they know it or not, whether they like it or not, is making this happen. And it's egregious, it's horrific, and if there was any sort of moral high ground to be reattained, this would be the starting place.
Yeah, and I think it's hard for people to hear. I think it's hard for a lot of Americans to hear that the U.S. is doing something so egregious, but you have to understand that I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, David, but I don't think the people in power in the U.S. care one way or another about either side. This is just about a, quote, pragmatic or practical interest. Well, we need to, we owe the Saudis a favor and we don't want them to get pissed. And so
100%.
I mean, pretty much. Pretty much, there have been initiatives in Washington that have tried to stop it. They tried to pass a war powers resolution, which is incredible that they would do that to try to stop us from arming the Saudis and, you know, helping their pilots train and doing mid-air repairs and fueling for them. We've passed resolutions. You know what Trump did? He vetoed it because Pete Navarro, his trade advisor, got lobbied by Raytheon. And they said, you know what, Pete? We need those profits. And so Trump comes out and he's like, I had to veto it because, you know, we had to protect all those American jobs. You know how many jobs were connected to all that funding he was giving to Saudi Arabia? 40 U.S. jobs were given to, you know what, to just continue committing a genocide in Yemen. That's how disgusting. That's the depravity of these people that we are dealing with. Once you acknowledge that these people simply do not care, that money is able to convince them to just allow this to happen, it's you realize just how disgusting the state and the government is. And I can't stand it. And this should be what we should be fighting for. If you want to like actually make an impact right now with this sort of thing, there's a great group. I believe the Quakers are doing a lot. There's a guy, Hayeb Al-Tayeb, I believe he is. He's gone on Scott Horton's show all the time. But he's with the Quakers, and they're trying to lobby to pass war power resolutions to try to stop this conflict from going through. And you know what? We've actually tried to make steps, and you know what they did? They get that stuff gets vetoed because you know what? Trump doesn't care about ending the wars in Yemen. He only cares about, you know, his ego and getting a little bit of extra money under the table.
This is the other reason that I'm involved with the Mises Caucus, because both parties, the Democrats and Republicans, are so thoroughly owned by the military-industrial complex that it's just, we have to have a third option. We have to be able to apply pressure to these groups to let them know that just because the Democrats are completely insane, it doesn't mean that we're going to automatically vote for Republicans. I really believe that until we break that duopoly, we will have, you know, continuing funding of genocides against our will. Because the politicians and the media will not cover it. They will not talk about it to the American people openly or honestly. So this is why we need independent media and we need third parties if we have any hope of ever stopping this stuff. David's right. It's absolutely disgusting.
Yeah, and we don't even need like a majority at all in like the House of Representatives. Maybe even like if we got like 2 senators. If we got 2 senators, that would be enough to throw a wrench at everything everyone else is doing. Because you know what? America's so divided and we're just so close. When it comes to like numbers in the Senate, just having 2 senators would be enough to stop everything, to throw a wrench in the track.
Look at the power Joe Manchin wields. I mean, it's crazy. So yeah, you're right. I mean, the country is very divided. I think that you would actually find that many people that are voting, you know, yes or no or whatever the good side is, would shift if we had 2 or 3 liberty and peace-minded politicians that were there. But regardless, we have to have more representation of non-interventionist and, you know, sound money, just sane politician representation on the federal level if we intend to stop this stuff, because it's so pervasive and it's happened my entire life and it's just getting worse. So it's heartbreaking.
Yeah, no, I mean, I just talked to Jeremy Kauffman, who's running for U.S. Senate
love Jeremy
from New Hampshire.
Best campaign.
And you're reminding me of one of his campaign ads, which we played during the interview.
War is gay, man. War is gay.
Yeah, we play that one during the interview.
I'm serious.
Yes. Power to the lizard people.
Yeah, but I one point that he made, which I think is valid, which is like, look, even as because I asked him, like, look, as a single senator, you'd be the only libertarian senator if you miraculously won, you'd be the only one. And his answer was like, well, yeah, but as a senator, you get a lot of power to do things, and like there's a platform to speak where people pay attention to you, and you can, we didn't talk about this issue in particular, but I'm thinking, if there was a Rand Paul type of person talking about Yemen, I don't know if Rand has actually even talked about Yemen, but if there were someone, in the Senate talking about Yemen and making impassioned speeches about this, and, as much as C-SPAN would want to make sure there's a camera fault, like, let's assume that gets recorded and goes on YouTube. I think you're right that it will be hard for some people to say, yeah, I'm still going to vote for this thing. I think some senators who don't have a direct, they don't have a direct relationship with Raytheon might be able to say, yeah,
I really believe that's why there's such a strong media blackout on this issue, because it's so bad Like, if the American people really understood it, I think that you would see it end very rapidly, because the politicians would realize that it's the end of their careers, and that's ultimately all they care about, that and the accumulation of money, and the board seat on Raytheon when they get out of office. I mean, that's really what they care about. But beyond that, they also do care about re-election, and I think that it would. I mean, it just wouldn't be popular. I don't think they even poll the American people on this stuff, because they don't even know about it. If you were to ask, I think 98% of people have no idea that this is even happening.
Right.
Yeah,
right. And everyone knows that Ukraine's happening.
Yeah,
exactly. And why do they know it? Because they want us to be involved, and they want to infuriate the American people to the point that they're willing to support, military conflict with Russia. I personally believe that's also why they lied about the election interference, the Russian Trump collusion nonsense, is because this was all in the works for a very long time.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, gentlemen. Any final comments before we wrap up today's show? It's been a pleasure to speaking with both of you. David, do you have anything for the audience that Yemen seems to be very impassioned about Yemen. Is there a final message you want to leave people?
Support the Quakers, man. Make sure, teach people about this, because you know what? As soon as you mention Yemen, they'll ask you, what are you talking about? We're involved in Yemen, and it's a very easy conflict to explain. It's not complex where you have to go and, Iraq, and then we empowered Iran, and then there was like Shiite militias, and you don't have to explain any of this complex stuff. All you have to do is talk about how we are aiding and abetting a genocide in Yemen. That is what we were doing, plain and simple. And these people didn't do anything to us at all. In fact, we're helping people who did things to us, like Al Qaeda. But Yemen might be the most important thing in the world, and we need to be fighting to make sure that this ends. Because if there's one thing that you can try to stop right now, it's mass murders abroad. That is something that we should be unilaterally opposed to as a people, no matter our political ideology. The worst thing the state does is committing these mass murder missions abroad. And you know what? If we have the chance to put pressure on politicians to actually make it stop, why not? Why not do that? Do everything you can. Let people know that Yemen can't wait. We have to actually make that stop.
Well said. And we can relate it even to counter economics. If you want to get rid of the stuff the government's doing, the evil stuff the government's doing, stop funding them. Stop using the dollar. Get out of the dollar if you can. Because, without us using the dollar, they can't do this. Clint, any final comments?
Yeah. Well, I think that David's probably right, that's the most, egregious form of, military intervention and aggression on the planet right now. But I think that I would still redirect people in terms of the egregious nature of central banking and ESG. If you can educate people on that, I did an episode called "Go Woke or Go Broke." A lot of people think it's "Go Woke, Go Broke." It's actually "Go Woke or Go Broke." Like they are dictating that you must go woke or you will go broke. And if you want to check that episode out, share it around with people. I think that'll wake a lot of people up. It's just like 40 minutes. You can put it on 1.5 speed. It'll take you less than a half an hour. It really gives you the background, the history, what it amounts to. I really think that is the biggest fight, at least when it comes to economics on the planet. And ultimately, economics leads to what the military is capable of. So if we're able to win that fight, you can probably win a lot of these conflicts that are starving and murdering innocent people across the globe too. So fix the money, fix the world, as the Bitcoin people say. You have to stop ESG if you want to fix the world too. So it's all part of the same picture, and I think that it's really, really important, because just as few people know about Yemen, same issue with ESG, and I'm grateful that I get to be on the cutting edge of trying to wake people up to the nefarious nature of what it is.
Yeah. Well, cool. David, how do people find you?
For me, really, all I care about is Twitter. I know I've got a Twitter account I'm pretty proud of. Real David B. Jr. Jr.'s and just JR, not like the full word spelled out. But you can find me there on Twitter, on YouTube and Odyssey. I got my show where I kind of talk about this stuff on my own. Road to Providence it's on YouTube and Odyssey. Odyssey, if you want to support on a less censorship heavy platform that does not hate you in your values. That's where you can find me though.
Cool. Clint, how can people find you?
Yeah, at Liberty Lockpod on Twitter. If you want to check out my show, it is called Liberty Lockdown. You can search that on any podcatcher and find it. Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all over the place. And if you want to watch me on Odyssey for the unedited versions, you can go there, search Liberty Lockdown, or YouTube. I'm still over there. Only about 80% of my episodes get put up over there because sometimes I talk too honestly about how insane this world is, and YouTube doesn't like that. But regardless, subscribe wherever you can find Liberty Lockdown, and thank you so much for having me on, Carter. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to your audience.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, man. It's been a blast.
Yeah, it's been a great conversation. Thank you both for coming, and I'll try and go to more libertarian events so I can hang out with cool people. And look, like I said earlier, the Mises Caucus is the thing that gives me hope. So I know that Clint's involved, and I can see that David's got a Mises sweatshirt on. So we're all cool. Thanks both to you.
Absolutely, brother.
All right. Take care, everyone. Thanks for watching. Interview with not Scott Horton. That was last week. Jeremy Kaufman comes up on this Friday. You'll see that. And don't forget to like, share, subscribe, do all those things. Go to unsafespace.com, where we never censor ourselves. And see you next time. Thanks for sticking around until the end. If you're new to Unsafe Space, check out our deep content library that includes discussions with everyone from James Lindsay to Brett Weinstein. And please consider helping to fund our work by visiting unsafespace.com/donate. You can find us on a variety of social media platforms, and you can find a community of like-minded individuals on our Unsafe Space Discord server, which is open to financial supporters at any level. We hope to see you there.
Warning. This is an unsafe space. Dangerous ideas have been detected. The content of this production does not meet WHO health and safety standards. Please report to a United Nations Sanitization Center immediately. Association with the following individuals is strictly prohibited. Experts who benefit from printing money agree that printing money does not cause price inflation. Trust me, just 2 more weeks to slow the spread of monkeypox. If you think about it, no one should be allowed to express opinions. But don't. Think about it, I mean. That's not your job. Thinking has been scientifically proven to be less efficient than compliance. Science, scientific, and scientifically are registered trademarks of the World Economic Forum. Unauthorized use is prohibited. Computer voice courtesy. Never mind, that last line is fake news. Please disregard it and return to your safe space immediately. There will be cake.